Welcome to the Geek Homeworld. I am your host, SavageTechman. We talk sci-fi, TV, movies, superheroes, and all from a geek perspective. You can find us on Blogger, Google+, Twitter, Facebook. We're everywhere. Join the Geek Homeworld. Welcome to another wonderful episode of the Geek Homeworld. I'm your host, SavageTechman, and thank you for tuning in again. This episode, we're going to talk about the top 10 best and worst superhero movies of all time. There has been a lot of going back and forth and trying to decide which are my favorites and which are not, so bear with us on this. We're going to begin this ranking from number 10 being the least favorite until number 1. So there's some controversy in this because it was very hard to narrow it down to 10 movies, and to get them in the proper order was just as difficult, I think, for me. So we're going to start with number 10, Captain America, the Winter Soldier. I liked this movie a lot. I liked the first Avenger also. It's not on the list here, but the Winter Soldier did a great job. It almost elevated to a level almost above just a superhero movie. So it was very riveting, very interesting storyline, very fast-paced. Everything just seemed to click very well. I liked the new costume that we saw in there and just how the whole movie was put together. But that was our number 10, Captain America, the Winter Soldier. In number 9 is Batman from 1989 with Michael Keaton. And this movie, at the time it came out in 1989, directed by Tim Burton, was so dark for the 80s because at the end of the 80s there, it was still very kind of bright, bubbly time. And for this movie to come out, it actually was very dark compared to what was out there. Jack Nicholson gave what looks like, in hindsight, all these years later, a comical version of the Joker, but very definitive, very Jack Nicholson. And what a smart man he was. He got a good percentage of the merchandising, which it made $1 trillion, billion, zillion dollars in merchandising. So very smart businessman there, Jack Nicholson was. Wonderful portrayal of the Joker. And you'll see later on in this list that the Joker reappears again. So there's a little bit of foreshadowing. So number 9 on my list here is Batman from 1989 with Michael Keaton. At number 8, we have X2, X-Men United. There was the 2000 movie X-Men, which launched the series, and Fox is still holding on to the X-Men franchise. I kind of wish they'd let it go so Marvel could do it right. And there's been several X-Men movies, all the way up to X-Men Apocalypse, which was good, but it wasn't what I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be much more than it was, but still, I enjoy the X-Men movies. We could pick apart the inconsistencies and the timelines and everything and switching directors, and Bryan Singer was there, then he wasn't, then he was, and, you could go into that, but we're not going to because it's all been kind of hashed out before. But X2, X-Men United brought the X-Men and Magneto and his brotherhood together to fight Colonel Stryker. And we see for the first time on film Hugh Jackman in his second X-Men movie playing Wolverine, but we got to see his backstory finally. And so that was really good to see. And we've seen some of that later on in Days of Future Past when they tried to fix the timelines that were messed up by X-Men The Last Stand. And we just see Wolverine at his most, at that time, berserker, rage. And of course, with Logan, that just came out last year or early this year, we see that in the R-rated version. But number 8 on our list, X2, X-Men United. Now, number 7, very pivotal movie. Actor who had been around for a long time, who had had ups and downs in his personal life and affected his professional life also. But he launched 10 years ago an entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. We're talking about Iron Man from 2008 with Robert Downey Jr. And it's an origin story. And at the time, for a little perspective, for those of you that don't know, and I'm sure you already do, but Iron Man was really not one of the most popular superheroes out there. He wasn't that popular. But to see Robert Downey Jr., he encompassed Tony Stark. He still does. And at his best and at his worst, even. And so we see that Iron Man is just a great beginning movie, a great origin story. And, you know, origin stories, especially when you get into the Spider-Man franchise, can just be, oh gosh, here we go again. Or the Batman franchise, oh, here we go again with the origin story. And, you know, we know at this point pretty much all the origin stories, but Iron Man was very fresh, and it was what a lot of people hadn't seen. So Robert Downey Jr. just did a great job, and feels like in real life, if Tony Stark did exist as a real life human being, that he would definitely be Robert Downey Jr. So he made that role, and he helped launch an entire franchise of excellent Marvel movies, the cinematic universe for Marvel there. Number 6 on our list is another entry, and it's Captain America Civil War, basically Avengers 2.5. So we had Avengers come out, which was phenomenal. Then we had Avengers Age of Ultron, and then Captain America came out. And of course there were movies in between and stuff like that, but Civil War basically had everybody. And it introduced Spider-Man, which we'll see in Spider-Man Homecoming later this summer around 4th of July. We'll see Spider-Man Homecoming and his kind of origin / story, and that's going to be exceptionally funny, and it's going to be great. And it also stars Robert Downey Jr., of course, as Iron Man, so he'll reprise his role in another Marvel movie and help carry that movie. But Captain America Civil War, Ant-Man, does anybody have any more fantastic powers they'd like to reveal now? The scene at the airport when they're fighting, Vision's one of my favorite characters. I mean, and how he accidentally hurt Rhodey, and just the whole group of people, everybody it felt like had an important part, and their story was equally important, all the way to Hawkeye kind of coming out of retirement to, what did he say in the movie? He said, so you're back out of retirement? And he says, well, I did a lot of golfing, and I went and shot 18 holes, got them all. He said, so, nothing really for me to do. So, but Captain America Civil War, I thought was going to go, seeing how DC was at the time with Batman versus Superman and everything was so dark. And we knew if by the comics, Civil War ended up with Captain America dying, and really thought I was going to go and see Captain America die in Civil War. And it didn't happen, thankfully. And, we're going to see Captain America in Infinity Wars, both of the movies, it sounds like. And so I'm excited about that. And the thing about Captain America Civil War is that it had so many characters in there, but they all had their own screen time and their own little bits. And it worked very well as a film. And The Winter Soldier, which was number 10 on our list here, it took Captain America to another level, and Civil War just took it to an extreme level of awesomeness. So number 6 on our list, Captain America Civil War. Now I'm digging way back here into the early 80s for this, but number 5 on our list, and I really was going back and forth with some of these movies. Some of them I wanted to all be number 1. A lot of these I do, but Superman 2, the famous Kneel Before Zod, 3 villains, Ursa, Nod, and of course General Zod taking on Christopher Reeve's Superman. And some people said, there was also the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2 that put an interesting take on it. If you haven't seen that, you should definitely check that out. But Superman 2 really did a lot for the Superman franchise, and some fans will say it was better than Superman the movie. This is really hard. This is like judging which of your children you like the best, or which of your friends are your best friends. It's really hard. It's like choosing family over family, which is kind of like Civil War. Why are mom and dad fighting? Like Batman versus Superman. Why are mom and dad fighting? Can't they get along? But anyway, number 5 on the list here, Superman 2. And he successfully fought off 3 equally superpowered villains. And that was good to see that. It was just an awesome movie. Yeah, it has its flaws, and there's good and bad in it. But all in all, Superman 2, my 5th favorite thing on the list here. Number 4, the only Spider-Man title that made it on the list, Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man 2, the second installment of Spider-Man, his second outing as Spider-Man. Brilliantly done. And Doc Ock as the character there, I mean, the criminal, not so much criminal, but the kind of conflicted scientist that had to overcome his own inner demons, as so to speak. Brilliant. The singing on the train, and Spider-Man trying to stop the train, and people realizing who he is, and of course him fighting to be happy as Peter Parker and also be with Mary Jane and be the superhero. So Spider-Man 2, a very good, solid movie. It's definitely one I could always rewatch and enjoy. I could pick it up at any point. Number 4 on our list. So now we're into the top 3 best superhero movies of all time. And like I said, it's a hard list. This next one I saw 4 times in 24 hours. I probably saw it about 8 different times at the theater. Love this movie. Could easily be my number 1 movie, but I'm going to explain why it's not. A good friend of mine, Digital Caveman, that's with 2 N's. You can check him out on Twitter, but we were talking before I was putting this list together, and he was actually helping me with my top 10 worst superhero films. We were just talking about that, and that's coming up in just a second. But this was his pick for number 1 movie, and I can't terribly disagree with him on this, but Marvel's Avengers. Digital Caveman, my friend, said that's exactly what a superhero movie should be. The kind of team up. A lot of people before Iron Man and Thor and all the other movies, Incredible Hulk and all the different, solo movies we had, Captain America and all that, to see them finally team up and knowing all those years it was coming, and then to actually see it on film, it just worked out well. And that's a film that I could watch over and over again, and I did, and I have, and I will continue to. And I can't wait for Infinity Wars, and then whatever the sequel to that is going to be called. We don't know at this time, but I tell you that it just next level stuff there with Avengers, but it landed number 3 on my list. Now, number 2, very important movie, the second time and the last time that Superman's going to appear on this list. Now, there have been so many incarnations of Superman throughout the decades, and, we went through a dry spell for a while there, but Christopher Reeve, Superman the movie, You Will Believe a Man Can Fly. And yes, it looks a little dated. Of course it is. As time passes, that's how things are. But for a lot of us, or people kind of my age, I do appreciate what Henry's doing with Man of Steel and what they're doing now. I do appreciate that. I do like them. I'm not a hater of Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice. I liked Man of Steel. Were there things in those movies I didn't like? Of course. Were there things I loved? Yes. And for me, most of what I saw on film, even Superman Returns with Brandon Routh, that didn't really take off that well, I still enjoyed, and I can still watch and enjoy it. A few things I cringe at, but basically, Superman the movie, this was made such an impression on me growing up. And of course, growing up playing with my superhero action figures and all that and everything, like a lot of us, Superman the movie, just Christopher Reeve just embodied what Superman is supposed to be. And I know we have to go in these days and times with a darker, grittier version. That always works for Batman, but it doesn't work for Superman. And I'm not dispelling how wonderful the performances of Superman have been in the different incarnations in the last decade or so. But for me, Christopher Reeve is one of the ultimate Superman actors because, and you know, we can talk about television. We have an episode on the podcast you can check out that talks about our Dawn of the League series. We have one on Wonder Woman, one on Batman, and one on Superman. So you can listen to that and hear our incarnations of the different Supermen as they were. But for me, Superman the movie, number 2 on the list here, could have easily been number 1 on my list. It's just the theme music, when you hear it, it's just still resonates, and it's still so wonderful. And it's hard to top a movie like that. Now Superman 2, which was number 5 on my list here, seemed in some ways to almost top it, but for just the initial impact of a movie that was kind of life-changing and altering and just to the imagination, Superman the movie was that for me and for a lot of people. And Christopher Reeve was a big part of that and how he played Superman. And he was the Boy Scout. He was not afraid to smile. He wasn't afraid to, he didn't brood or anything. And he did the Clark Kent Superman, Kal-El. You know, he portrayed that wonderfully. So we have number 10, Captain America, the Winter Soldier. Number 9 from 1989, Batman with Michael Keaton. At number 8, X2, X-Men United. Number 7 is Iron Man. Number 6, Captain America Civil War. Number 5, Superman 2. Number 4, Spider-Man 2. Number 3, Marvel's Avengers. Number 2, Superman the movie. So this is kind of a no-brainer, but this movie totally transcended what a superhero movie was. And it was brilliant. Directing, cinematography, writing, everything was just hitting on all cylinders. The number 1, in my opinion, best superhero movie, The Dark Knight. And that shouldn't surprise a lot of people. This movie, with Heath Ledger's legendary portrayal of the Joker, and, you know, we mentioned back at number 9, Batman from 1989, we had Jack Nicholson's Joker. And he played a different Joker. I'm not going to say that one's better than the other. And their Suicide Squad, Jared Leto. I did not care much for Suicide Squad. I did not care for Jared Leto's Joker. And I may have to watch it again and find some redeeming qualities. But as of this point, I haven't seen from Jared Leto's Joker what I saw from Heath Ledger. His portrayal of the Joker was just mind-numbing. It was just intriguing. The music, the opening credits, the scene, the bank robbery, and just the little mannerisms that Heath Ledger himself put into the script there and put into the performance were just legendary. And The Dark Knight actually was so important that it set the tone for the current superhero movies that we have with DC. I mean, everybody's got to be darker and grittier, except for, and I'm going to transition now into our honorable mentions. And this was originally on my list, and I was like, it's too soon to put this on the top 10 of all time, but Wonder Woman gets an honorable mention here. It's not on my top 10 list, but it brought out of me, and I've heard critics say this too, and I agree with them, that it felt like Superman the movie, the optimism when she goes out onto the battlefield for the first time in her full armor, Wonder Woman, and the Dark Knight, just the complexity of the story and how well written it is. So many things made me think of those two movies, and I really felt enlightened. We're in such oversaturation of movies about superheroes. We're basically 2000 started with X-Men, and you can go back farther with Blade at 1998, which was a very good movie. But Wonder Woman just encapsulated a lot of hope, and she is now, I think, the shining star, maybe overshadowing Superman and Batman. So it's going to interesting to see if her role has changed any when Justice League comes out in November. And, we're already talking sequels for Wonder Woman, and it'll be set in the more modern time, which I think is exactly the way to go, just like they did with Captain America. Another honorable mention for best superhero movies, it's kind of the anti-superhero movie, but one I really like, and it's very much on the dark side, but Watchmen. I think Watchmen deserves an honorable mention just because it was so unique, and it was just such a wonderful group of actors there. And, I found myself rooting for the bad guy along with Dr. Manhattan, which is incredible. And Veidt, I think was his last name. I can't think of a superhero name, but, Adrian, was it Adrian Veidt? It escapes me right now, but Watchmen gets another honorable mention. All right, now it's time to shift gears. And these are mostly in the following is mostly in the vein of from like best to the worst. But some of these are interchangeable. Some of these are just god-awful movies. But our top 10 worst superhero films, and apologies to the artists were in them. Sometimes they couldn't escape the bad script or, just production problems, or it just wasn't a good fit. But our top 10 worst superhero films. At number 10, Fantastic Four from, I believe, 2016, last year. I watched it, and it wasn't as bad as everybody said, but it was bad. It didn't feel like a Fantastic Four movie. Too many things were changed about it. I don't care about the casting. I'm not talking about the casting. It just didn't feel right. Dr. Doom didn't feel like Dr. Doom. And yes, I know things change, they evolve. I get that. But I just wasn't as excited. And I know as cheesy as, looking back, the first two Fantastic Four movies were, Fantastic Four and then Rise of the Silver Surfer, which, by the way, they did justice, no pun intended, to the Silver Surfer. I think they did a very good job with that, except, of course, the stupid, idiotic Galactus being a cloud, really, because whoever didn't want a robot in the movie or whatever, like Galactus, they wanted him like a smoke monster from Lost, and that didn't work. But that ruined, that was a big point of ruining Silver Surfer. But I enjoyed those versions, and, had those versions continued, we might have not got our Captain America that we have with Chris Evans, who did great as the Human Torch, and Michael Chiklis, who's now on Gotham, that was the thing. And I enjoyed the cast, and the recent talk on the internet is that don't look forward to any incarnations of the Fantastic Four for the near future. So I think it's messed up so badly that it's going to take a while before they even approach doing a Fantastic Four movie. And that's a shame because that's, one of the first family of comics. So it would be good to see it done correctly, Fantastic Four done correctly. Number 9 on my list, and you're going to see this name. It's funny because all my Christopher Reeve movies made a list. 2 of them made and I didn't realize it this time, but 2 of them made the best superhero list, and the next 2 in this order make the worst. Superman 4. The Quest for Peace. Now, I liked the idea. It was set, I think, around, this was 87, I believe, which was a little bit late, because the first one came out in 1978. Batman. The first Christopher Reeve movie, Superman the movie, came out in 78. And then a little bit later was Superman 2. And then we had Superman 3, and then Superman 4. Superman 4 with the little solar guy, didn't get it, didn't like it. At the time as a kid, yeah, it was kind of cool. It was Superman, okay? There wasn't much else on. And so I never have a problem with Christopher Reeve's acting or whatever, but it just wasn't a good script. It was a good idea, and I think he actually had some input into the script and getting Superman 4 done. And this was before his tragic accident. And but Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, ends up at number 9 on our list. Now Superman 3, which basically did give us a shot of Bizarro Superman in the garbage heap place when they're trying to fight. He's fighting himself, and it basically, I think it was around 82, 83. Richard Pryor was like the hot comedian. He was one of the biggest stars back then. And this basically was a Richard Pryor movie, and he played Gus, and he was just kind of a bumbling idiot, and I mean that respectfully. But I didn't really care. It didn't have Lex Luthor in this one, so it didn't feel right. And Superman 3, number 8 on the list, it just didn't work for me, and the whole computer taking over, and it was just very cheesy. Number 7, and this is a forgotten one, The Punisher from, I believe it was 1989. I'm just going to leave it at that. It was terrible. Why? I don't know. It just was. Just some movies are just so bad, they just defy reason, okay? Number 6 on our list, Supergirl with Helen Slater. I think that was around 1984 when that came out, roughly. And it was pretty awful. I wanted so much to see a Supergirl movie, and growing up, I might have thought it was better, but getting older, I realized it really wasn't. So Supergirl, number 6, worst movie on our list. Number 5, and I actually saw this, not in theaters, but I saw it on some network, Catwoman with Halle Berry, and the best compliment I can give this movie is to just put it on mute and watch it. It's painful, but to see Halle Berry dressed as Catwoman's worth it. It's worth seeing for that, but definitely not for the content. It could have been a great movie. It was supposed to be Michelle Pfeiffer following up from Batman Returns in like 91, I think, something like that. But Halle Berry got the role, and she's such a great actress, and I felt so bad for her in this movie. And hopefully at least she got a good paycheck out of it. But number 5, worst movie on our list, Catwoman. Elektra, a spinoff of Daredevil, and Daredevil almost made my list, but I did like Ben Affleck as Daredevil. Was it great? Some people hated the movie. I thought it was okay. And Elektra, I don't even think I could finish watching the movie. It was so bad. And I think they later on, is it Jennifer Gardner? And I get the names wrong, but she even apologized later for it. Number 3, worst movie, superhero movie, would be Steel. And I've seen it a couple times with Shaq O'Neal. I guess it was a valiant attempt, and I know he was at probably the peak of his stardom, and he thought he could do anything, but I wanted it to work, but it didn't. And, Steel kind of comes from the death of Superman, and one of the people that rise up and claim they're Superman is Steel, and I get that, and they didn't really touch on that aspect of it, but it still didn't really work as a movie for me. It was kind of painful to watch. Steel at number 3. Number 2, this movie I liked better than most, but Green Lantern. Of course, now we have Ryan Reynolds playing Deadpool, which some people should have said, or I kind of thought it could have made it into our top 10 best superhero movies, but it was almost a superhero comedy, Guardians of the Galaxy was another one I thought of, even the recent one, for my top 10 best superhero movies, but kind of decided against those, but at this time. So Green Lantern, the suit, it was all CGI, and it just didn't work as a movie. It just was strange. Number 2 on our list of worst superhero films. And number 1, the movie that killed the franchise. Not hardly anything in this world could kill Batman except Batman and Robin, the movie, with Schwarzenegger in it as Mr. Freeze. We had Poison Ivy. We had Uma Thurman. It just terrible movie. Is it the worst on the list? A lot of people say yes, because it just killed Batman. Of course, Batman Begins, and then The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises was probably the penultimate of the resurgence, definitely, of Batman on film. But Batman and Robin, pretty much, Joel Schumacher later came back and apologized for it. But Joel Schumacher definitely, he did almost irreparable damage to the Caped Crusader. So more than any of the villains that Batman faced, he was probably the worst for putting this movie out. And I still will defend George Clooney in this for one reason. I think he makes a good, and I've said this a trillion times, but I think he makes a good Bruce Wayne in real life, if Bruce Wayne were a real life person. So does Ben Affleck, but Batman and Robin, just not good. So that was our 10 worst superhero films. Fantastic Four from last year, Superman 4, Quest for Peace. Number 8, Superman 3. Number 7, The Punisher from, I think, 1989. Supergirl, the movie. At number 6. Number 5, Catwoman. Number 4, Elektra. Number 3, Steel. Number 2, Green Lantern. And Batman and Robin, the worst superhero film of all time. So let us know what you think. And I know there could be a lot of discussion about this. So thank you for joining us for this episode of the Geek Homeworld Podcast. I'm SavageTechman, a.k.a. Ed. Thank you for listening so much. Bye. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Geek Homeworld Podcast with your host, SavageTechman. You can find us on Libsyn, Google+, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, listen to us on iTunes, see us on YouTube, be part of our Mixler chats. Thank you. See you again on the Geek Homeworld Podcast.